Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Juliana Kerr. I'm the director of the Global Cities Initiative here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Before we start, please note the Council is an independent, nonpartisan platform. The views expressed by the individuals we host are their own, and they do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Today's program is on the record and we are being live streamed, so please silence your phones, but engage on social media, tweet, Facebook, take pictures. And tonight we're gonna have our conversation on urban violence in the Americas. This program is actually part of a Global Cities agenda and research and programming that we do here. Some of you may have seen last week we hosted our big Chicago Forum on Global Cities. This was our 4th annual forum in partnership with the Financial Times newspaper. Videos from that session and from all of the events are going to be available online at the chicagoforum.org. So if you want to check into that, it's available. We are very excited about today's program. This is actually part of a 2-day session that we're holding here in Chicago with support from the MacArthur Foundation. We brought in leaders from Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, across the United States, working with our partners, USAID, the Crime Lab at the University of Chicago, and a lot of the vision and support from the World Bank to put together what would a common vision for a regional approach on combating and reducing and preventing urban violence, what that would look like. We are going to be publishing a report on the findings of our 2-day strategy session later in the fall. And for today, we were actually really fortunate to be able to pull from the group of people who are meeting over these 2 days and have some representatives for this public conversation. Today, we're going to have Evelyn Diaz, who is the president of Heartland Alliance here in Chicago. We have Verónica González. She's the Chief Resiliency Officer from the city of Juarez in Mexico, and it's part of the 100 Resilient Cities program. Alberto Kopittke, who is from Brazil. He serves as the executive director of an Instituto, Cidade, Segura, which is a Safe Cities Institute, and Santiago Uribe, who is the chief resiliency officer from the city of Medellin in Colombia. And the conversation will be moderated by Rosanna Ander, who is the founding executive director of the Crime Lab and the Education Lab at the University of Chicago's Urban Labs. We will have time for questions from and participation after their moderated conversation. But before we begin, we are going to have special remarks and opening remarks by Mayor Michael Nutter. He's going to be kicking us off. 2-time mayor of Philadelphia, and he is also a distinguished fellow on global cities with us here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and on the Urban Lab's National Advisory Committee at the University of Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Mayor Nutter to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back in, I think I'll just have to start saying my adoptive town of Chicago, and my adopting parents are right there, Sam and Donna. Thank you for being here. Urban violence in the Americas, and I want to certainly thank Juliana and the entire team that's here. First and foremost, I'm sorry that I nearly gave you a heart attack. Having walked in at 5:28 for a program that starts at 5:30. Sorry about that. Some old habits don't die. We had a great session earlier today, and we have even more work to do tomorrow. Violence is a very personal issue, or it should be. We're talking about real people who have real families, in real communities, who are shot, stabbed, killed, harmed in some way, shape, or form. Public safety is, in fact, the #1 responsibility of every government in the United States of America and anywhere else in the world. As said to me by an even greater and better mayor, Mike Bloomberg in New York, you cannot have a great city if people don't feel safe. All other things fall to the side. We can build big buildings. We can invest in economic development. We can have fantastic summer programs and job programs for our young people and adults. But the #1 responsibility of any government local, county, state, and federal, is public safety. America was attacked some number of years ago on that fateful day, September 11th, 2001. Nearly 3,000 people were killed that day in 3 different locations. We created an entirely new agency that did not exist the day before, the Department of Homeland Security, because America had been attacked and we wanted our people to be safe. I've come to say from time to time that because this is a national and, of course, international problem, but just speaking for the United States, not that I speak for the United States. Where's the Department of Neighborhood Security? 30,000 some odd people between homicides and suicides die every year in the United States. Every day, 29 to 32 people will be murdered in this country. That would be the definition of a mass violent attack. It's just that those 29 to 32 people are in different places all over the country. Seemingly nameless, faceless people. The incidents will never run at the bottom of the TV screen. There will not be any marches, demonstrations, but they were real people too. We're in an environment where, for white children, it is seemingly unsafe for them to be in school, while in the African American community, school is probably the safest place for black kids to be in America. Those two ideas, those two realities are in conflict with each other because a school should, in fact, be the safest place for any child or young person or teacher in the country. But you also should be able to walk down the street or sit on the steps. And so, as I started this and said it was personal, it is. We had significant reductions in violence and crime in the city of Philadelphia, but one shooting, one stabbing, one murder is one too many. I had the occasion to learn of a young lady who I had not met before. Her name is Tanira Borum. And you're here in Chicago, and you might not know her as well. There's a picture of her. I carry it in my wallet every day. A number of years ago, Tanira was sitting on the steps in her neighborhood down the street from her house. She was having her hair braided. And even for someone like myself, and Sam and I go to the same barber, but I actually know what braiding is. I formerly had an afro a long time ago. And as she sat there, 2 guys a half a block down the street were shooting at each other. And one of those stray bullets hit Tanira in her chest, and she died. Senseless violence on our streets. About a day or so later, unannounced, no press, no notice, we drove to her mother's house. And I went in her home, and we sat in the living room, and I told her that I was sorry, not just for the loss of Tanira, but that I apologized to her because we had failed in our ability to keep Tanira Borum safe as she sat on the steps getting her hair done. And we embraced, and we talked some more, and her mom gave me this photo, which I put in my wallet, and has been with me every day since, because this was my responsibility. She was my responsibility. It's personal. These are not nameless, faceless people. They're someone's daughter, son, parent, grandmother, grandfather. And so as we look to more holistically, with partnership, not just the police department, great department here in Chicago, great department in Philadelphia, This is not just a policing problem. This is a massive public health crisis in the Americas. We are violent with each other. The ready access to weapons, illegal weapons, and the use of those weapons is destroying the moral fabric of the United States of America. As policymakers, as elected officials, the business community, the philanthropic community, civic community, and the religious community, all of us have a role to play, not individually, but collectively. Let us remember the Teneras and all the others whose names we don't know, but who are trying to live their life. This is not about the right to bear arms. Interestingly enough, there is one place where you don't have a right to bear arms. That would be in the halls of Congress, where you cannot take a weapon, no matter what the Constitution says. Interestingly enough, 435 people are murdered every 2 weeks in the United States. That number, 435, does that maybe ring a bell with some of you? Of course, the exact number of seats in the House of Representatives. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I just happen to believe that I have a First Amendment right not to be shot. These ideas are not in conflict with each other. It's our politics. Funding, programs, support, and really caring about individuals. There is a reason why all of you get to do what you get to do, and none of you are presently incarcerated. You had access to opportunity, someone cared, someone looked out for you. Every person who's in prison, every person with a previous criminal record could have been one of you. Something went wrong, and something was broken, and it is our duty and responsibility as citizens of the Americas to do something about it and make life better for Teneras. Thanks a lot.
Well, I don't know where Mayor Nutter went, but thank you, Mayor Nutter, for putting into sharp relief why we're here. This really is, I would argue, the most important challenge facing our city and cities around the country and cities in the Americas. So just to sort of put some numbers behind it, the Mexico Citizens Council for Public Safety, their security report found that 47 of the 50 most violent cities in the world are in the Americas, measured by homicide rates. And in fact, 17 of the top 50 cities are in Brazil, 12 in Mexico, the rest are in Colombia, Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, and we have 5 in the United States. And of course, the burden of that violence is not evenly distributed. We know that it's concentrated among our respective countries' most marginalized, often racially segregated neighborhoods and under-resourced neighborhoods, and among young people. And while there seems to be, hopefully, growing policy focus on income inequality, there seems to be far less focus on an inequality that's even more fundamental: access to basic safety. So the question that we've been talking about most of today is really, what would a regional approach to tackling violence in the Americas look like? So let me actually start with you, Verónica. Can you tell us a little bit about what's been happening in Juarez, Mexico, which was once known as the most violent city in the world? What's been going on in Juarez of late?
Okay, thank you. But actually, the topic about the violence appears maybe in 2008, when she called the most violent city in around the world. There is in that time, the main problem is about violence, about drugs. There is, for example, for our city, is a biggest problem because it's near to the border, is near to El Paso, Texas, and we have a lot of poverty. We have a vulnerability, social vulnerability. We have different problems in our city. Maybe that is the big reason to focus on to solve that problems, because we need to create a different way to try to enforce the different social programs to reduce the violence. We have a lot of challenge in our city because we need to create creative solutions. Maybe that is our challenge. We need to solve all of the topics.
And just to put a little bit in perspective, I think right now the homicide rate in Juarez is about 56 per 100,000. Right now in Chicago, it's about 25 per 100,000. Yeah. And of course, 56 per 100,000 is an improvement from 2009, but still, we felt like we had a massive crisis in Chicago when we went from 15 to 25 per 100,000. So just want to put some of that into perspective. So Santiago, coming from Medellin, Medellin's often pointed to as really a pioneer in urban revival and including on the violence challenges. It's really become a modern tourist destination. How did Medellin go from being so violent and a place that people were afraid to travel and so known around cartels to really being a huge tourist destination? What took place?
Yeah. First of all, just to give you a sense of what happened in Medellin, and something that we're not proud of it, but we have to acknowledge. In 1991, we were the most violent city in the world with close to 398 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. Just in normal people numbers is we kill close to 700 soccer teams. Now we're talking about World Cup, 700 soccer teams in a year. And what I'm talking about soccer teams, because most of those were guys between 15 and 24 years old, soccer players, like kids who want to play football here on the streets, or perhaps to become Ronaldo or Messi or any of them. And they, as Mayor said, they never had the opportunity. So the first lesson is that we learned in Medellin that it was that violence was not the main issue or the main problem, but behind violence, social exclusion, social and spatial segregation was actually the bigger picture. And we realized that violence was just the manifestation of that bigger issue. And what I'm saying is, what is important and what is the main lesson learned from Medellin is cities like Chicago don't need to repeat that history, that you are ahead. You had a major issue here with 25 today, but you know, and you can learn from cities like us and Juarez what could be done and the reasons why we ended up there. And it's always an early step to take. And I will suggest to look forward in terms of social exclusion, economical exclusion, and to be able to be a more integrated society.
That's great, and I think it is really important to recognize the context and place really matters, but there are things that really do transcend place, and I think social exclusion is really a sort of a common theme across the violence that we're looking at in the Americas, that it is it may look a little different in different cities and different groups being excluded, but that is a common factor, so I think it's really important to point out. Alberto, can you talk about what's been going on in Brazil? I think, unfortunately, Brazil is often in the media for not the most positive things, including just exceptional rates of violence in many of your cities. So what has the country, which has really enormous resources, what has been the response?
Not good things there. Thank you very much. I'm here with some notes to help me with English. Well, we are living the worst moment of our history. We have something like 70,000 homicides each year. That is something like 120 each day. The mayor talked about that terrific day in 2001. We have September 11 each 20 days in Brazil. And it looks like that our nation and our cities, they gave up from their youth. We have a serious cultural problem. It's a heritage from our dictatorship and from the war on drugs. And people believe that we have to kill more young guys to resolve the violence problem. So we have a cultural problem. The public support actions of violence against these young boys, and we don't have any national plan. The biggest states of our nation doesn't have any plan, and the biggest cities neither too. So it's really important to build some partnerships, and we need help. We are here with Renato Lima, that's from our National Forum. That is our reference. We have 300 people that are working some projects, some of them from the police, and we have to work with police to build new strategies based on evidence and to overcome this challenge.
Great, and we'll get to talk more about some of the specifics in a minute. So, Evelyn, would you tell us, I mean, obviously the audience is from Chicago. They're probably fairly familiar with what's going on, but can you say a little bit about what's been happening in terms of the violence, the increase, and sort of what the response has been? And I think it would be great if you could use both your Heartland hat, but also as a former commissioner for an agency. You know, what has the public sector response been, and what has the nonprofit and philanthropic sector response been?
That's a really full question for the 2 minutes I have, but I'll say this. I will say that I'm really humbled by Mayor Nutter's words and being with our colleagues earlier today and just kind of hearing the various challenges happening across the Americas. It really does give some perspective to what we're doing in Chicago. It makes me feel really happy that we have made some of the strides that we have made, and I know that it doesn't feel that way day to day in Chicago because we keep seeing these numbers and it keeps really weighing on us. But you know, right from where we sit right now, despite our best efforts, we saw a massive surge in violence and gun violence in 2016, a really alarming one. Lots of people speculated on what the causes were of that, and even without being able to see any definitive cause in the data, we knew as a city that we really had to redouble our efforts to get at the heart of it. And so one of the projects, we've been talking a lot throughout the day about projects like Cure Violence, and we have Chicago Cred, who's been participating, and my organization have really recognized that if we're going to solve this problem, we have to be brave enough to go right at it, to identify where the epicenter is, if you will, to use a term used today, where the epicenter of the violence is, and be brave enough to go in and engage with the individuals who are most likely to be involved in that gun violence. And to do that in a way that is about recognizing the dignity of people, of trusting that knocking on somebody's door and building trust with that person and offering them a real opportunity out of the lifestyle that they are entrenched in, that a belief that really could make a difference. And so my organization has been working on a project called Ready Chicago that is doing exactly that. We're using predictive analytics, we're using street level intelligence to identify specific individuals in 4 of the most violent communities in Chicago, and we are going to find them, and we are engaging them in a jobs program that infuses cognitive behavioral therapy, and we are relentlessly engaging those individuals. We are sending a message that we are not going to give up on you. Even if you're giving up on yourself, we're going to keep coming back. We're going to engage you in this program, and we understand that you're going to keep failing in this program, and so we've built this 2-year ramp where we're going to work with them very intensively over that period of time. And what's really promising about this is that we are using approaches that, we're working with Cure Violence, we're working with partners across the city, we're working with the crime lab, we're doing this or studying as a randomized control trial, and hoping to learn from this. But for me, it represents a new way that we're working in Chicago, working in collaboration with community groups, bringing data in smart ways, acknowledging that these problems are complex and they're not going to be quick fixes. We have to stick with it for a while, and we have to stick with these individuals for a while, and we have to invest in places that are, are hard to invest in. And so it gives me great hope, despite the fact that we have seen these kind of spikes recently.
Great, thank you. So Santiago, both you and Verónica are the Chief Resiliency Officers, I believe, for your respective cities. So can you say a little bit about what that is, and where does violence and the work of violence prevention and reduction fit within your resiliency role within your city?
Yeah, we city members of 100 Resilience Network, pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation. And when we applied, that was in 2013, Medellin was the only city who applied, acknowledging resilience as the capacity as an urban system to overcome the causes and effects of urban violence and conflict. And that was interesting because it puts violence at the heart of the resilience agenda. Not to say that it's been easy, it's the challenge we have, and Major knows about it. It's not really very easy for practitioners, for the academia, or politicians to sell the idea of that how important safety is. And that's why we have you here to talk, and you were here to acknowledge that this is about people with names, with identity, and people who matters. I mean, think about you. We are here because the environment created around us help us and provide us that safety and allow us to develop our own projects and all of that. So violence is, and violence prevention is important because not a single city will be able to become a resilient city if they don't are at the front safe, secure, prosper, but more than that, inclusive and bring the opportunities for people to develop their own projects. So I will say that people matters, and we need to create a safe environment for them and allow them to do what they really want to do in life. Mm-hmm. And that's why we push violence and violence prevention at the heart of the resilience agenda, not only in 100 cities, but in across the world.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. So Verónica, one of the things we talked a lot about, and I think there was no question for all of us who spent the day together, that there is huge benefit to some peer-to-peer learning, hearing from other cities what they're doing, what's working, what's not working, what some of the challenges are. So it does seem to make sense to think about a regional approach in the Americas to address violence, recognizing that there are some important contextual differences. But I think there's another reason, which is there are also connections and ties between what's happening in the US and the impact it has in Mexico and vice versa, and in Central America and in Chicago. And so, one of the things we talked a little bit about was the role that guns from the US are playing in the violence in Mexico. So can you say a little bit about some of those connections, whether it's sort of the guns or other aspects of sort of US policy that have a direct impact on Juarez?
Yeah, I think that is the main reason to create a network or to connections with the other cities is to solve the problems, because Juarez is not just one city to have the problem, the gun problem through the border, but I need, because it's maybe in Tijuana, in other cities near to the border with the south of the United States, have the same problem. But in Juarez is a geographically point in the middle of the border between U.S. and Mexico, and through Juarez came a lot of drugs. That is the topic. To come to the Mexico is methamphetamines and marijuana, and through the United States to Mexico, the main is gone. But we have a lot of problems, because in Juarez, every person who lives in Juarez, except me and my family and the other friends, have a gun. If you have any problem in the city, maybe you could drive and you fighting with one guy, maybe you solve the problem with a shot. And maybe all the people think, maybe Santiago is sell all of the drugs in the city. No, maybe it's the problem, the social problem, because all the people is violent. In the front, I born in Mexico City. I live in Juarez 7 years ago. Live in Juarez, and I saw the people, a lot of violence, because I don't know, in the morning told us is maybe the weather system, the high temperatures, I don't know, it's a lot of problems, because it's in the semi-desertic region, and we have the complexity in our city. But maybe I like to hear about different experience, but I need to know that we have a lot of solutions. Maybe it's to implementation process or evaluation process, or maybe design process, but we have a lot of experience to put together, and maybe that is the most value thing in our cities, but maybe into the networking connections.
Great, thank you. When we started the Crime Lab back in 2008, part of the reason we did that was we felt like there wasn't enough really good evidence about what works for whom and why. And I think Chicago really has been, in many ways, at the forefront of trying to innovate and start to use data and evidence, and other cities as well. In talking to some of you guys, and including you, Alberto, could you help us understand where your respective cities are in terms of using data, evidence, and evaluation as you're thinking about strategies to reduce violence?
Sure. Just one comment about guns. We are very far from the border, but we receive guns from here too, the big ones. So
Assault rifles.
it's a regional problem. U.S. is our biggest exporter, it's right? From big guns. So we have to talk together about this problem. And we have a serious gap in Brazil about evidence. I finished a systematic review. I found 80 studies already done of impact evaluation, but almost of them from economists, from national studies about some legislation or relation between economic and homicides. But we don't have any randomized controlled trial already done in Brazil, anyone. So we have a huge problem, but we are making a little studies. We are producing little knowledge about what works. And people think that we cannot use what comes from here, the good things. And because they think that, no, it's American, US reality or European, England reality, it will not work here. But the problem is this, not exactly the same, but it looks like poor boys, black boys, guns. And so people, I think that it's an ideology that rejects the relations between science and violence prevention. It's a militarization ideology, a old school, even in army, it's old, this vision, but that it's really inside minds in police and in the public. And our institute, I'm a member of a Safe Institute, Safe City Institute, that we created. Here is Tamara, who participated too, and to talk about solutions. We want to produce evidence. We can do that. Randomized controlled trials, we can learn. Maybe we can make, we are talking about this with some donors, some banks. Come on, help us, but maybe with small projects to help us produce evidence in a more long term. Don't work only with governments, 3 or 4 years term, and after we lose everything. So we are trying to change this culture. We have a network of researchers, but just to finish, we have, of course, a lot of people studying violence in Brazil, of course, in universities, but they are studying the origins of violence. They are talking about the problem, not about the solution. So it's a problem inside the academy too, to change this way of view.
It's a really, really important point. We're going to take questions from the audience in just 1 minute. I want to let Evelyn talk a little bit about, I think one of the really exciting things about READY is not just that there's going to be an impact evaluation, so that we'll know at the end of it what impact it's having, but the sort of attention to detail on the implementation side that you guys and your organization and all the partners that you're working with are really documenting what you're doing so that the lessons can be shared with other jurisdictions. So can you talk a little bit about the process that you went through to really take the idea of combining these different types of interventions and delivering it to how you actually did the design work so that afterwards there's something that can be shared with other practitioners and other jurisdictions?
So I would say it's not so much about the process as much as just what we set out to do was really kind of unreasonable. We were going to be asking private foundations to pay for a program that involved offering jobs and paying for jobs for some of the most high-risk individuals in the city, people who are difficult to find and engage and don't participate in programs, and we were saying, let us do this. Let us pay, please help us pay for these jobs, and not only for a few months, but for 18 months. And it was a bold ask, and we understood that nobody would invest in a program like that, as risky as that is, sending in street outreach workers into some of the most violent communities and engaging with people who are in, kind of in active conflicts, and that nobody would take that risk if we didn't set up the randomized control trial, that we were going to rigorously evaluate this to see if it, to see what its impact would be, and that along the way we were going to work to learn as much as we could about this population that very few people know about the interventions, about every single day how it's going. And so, so we set it up kind of, we had to in order to, I think, win the confidence of the investors to invest in it. And I think building the evidence is really important. It's an important part of getting more people engaged and helping us bring solutions to scale. But just throughout the day, I've just been in conversations, and even Sam Scott, who's been a real leader in Chicago on engaging the corporate community in this issue, he surprised me by saying he thinks like, we're only 20% of the way there. I thought we were much further. But what I've heard as a theme is that cities and municipalities throughout the Americas, there are challenges in getting politicians, mayors, governors, academics, system players, and the public and the business community to really care about this issue enough to make a long-term difference. And so it just has emerged as a theme that I think as we're thinking about what we could be doing as a region is building more academic evidence, like through these kinds of evaluations, but also building business case and really understanding what the dollars and cents are, and then figuring out how we make the case to the people who matter that we need to be investing all eyes on these issues and invest in these kinds of solutions.
Great, so I know we're tight on time, so I'm gonna go ahead and take questions from the audience, and if you could please ask just quick questions because we are very, very tight on time. Oh, and wait for the microphone, sorry.
Thanks. My question is for Mr. Uribe. You started off by discussing that violence was recognized to be the result or the manifestation of the problem. The problem was social. Could you discuss specific concrete measures that were taken to address the problem, which resulted in Medellin going from the most violent city to a tourist destination?
Thank you. And excuse me, your name is? Jackie, thank you for the question. The first step was understanding that violence was more integrated into a major issue of social exclusion. And just to give you a concrete idea of what we did in 1998, when two mayors in a row understood the issue. First, we identified the Human Development Index in a more integrated way to allocate resources in specific communities. And the first criteria was, are the most violent communities deprived of social services like schools, cultural centers, health, transportation, and many others? And the correlation was direct. And I'm not saying what we did is actually, it was major, and we can say that by deploying school, cultural centers, transport systems, or many of others of all those services helped to reduce violence all over the world, but it helped in Medellin. We did it. Santo Domingo is one of the concrete cases in Comuna 1 and Comuna 13, where they had no access to transport, jobs, schools, public health, and many other of all those services. And we designed a specific strategy called PUI, Planes Urbano Integrales, Urban Integrated Plans. And just to give you an idea, a single administration deployed 85% of the budget into that specific strategy. 4 years dedicated to a single community to address in a more integrated way what happened. And 30 years down the line, you see the figures dropping. But that also brings you a question of, but what happened with those other communities where you can invest because you're focusing in a single community? And when we look at Medellin today with that perspective, Castilla, which is actually opposite, across the river, is suffering so much from violence because we haven't been able to invest there in the same amount, not only amount, but with the same intention, intensivity, and priority. And now we're doing it, and we're doing it again, and we've done it 10 times. But it's a historical debt, social debt with communities that it has to be addressed in a more integrated way. You can't solve violence with police and defense approach. It needs to be an integrated approach from social, health, educational, cultural, and all those services that makes a life possible. I will say that.
And it shouldn't be, you know, it is, but it shouldn't be such a radical notion that you look at where the needs are the greatest and allocate resources accordingly. But that is not the common way of doing business in the public sector. So commend you guys for doing that. I don't know, Jack or? Yeah.
Addressing my question. Thank you. Evelyn, to you. Hello, Evelyn. It's good to see you again. You said, we will not give up on these kids. Quote, we will stick with individuals for a while. And so many of these kids, as those who work close, know that these kids are dying for a relationship. But if you get close, they're going to spit in your face and push you away because you'll let them down like everybody else has. So a little bit more from you about what sticking with them for a while means and how you support your workers who do that and who are going to face their kid who they had a lot of hope on, who was shot the other night, 2 days before he graduated. So the issue is, I'd like you to explore what sticking with looks like.
Well, programmatically, for the first, we're going to keep knocking on their door. We're going to keep finding them for a year before, and so they can say no to us as much as they want. We're just going to keep calling. And some of our outreach workers will say they'll reach out to somebody 3 times a day, whatever it is. It's just keeping up a relationship until. And you know, our hope is that the young person will say yes to the offer and then start showing up for work every day. And they've got a 40-hour work week with us. Some of that is actually working on work crews, and some of it is participating in cognitive behavioral therapy groups, and some of it is doing a professional development, working on other aspects of their life. And so long as they're showing up, you know, we're approaching them with love. I don't know how else to say it. I know, you know, depending on the audience, how that might sound, but what they hear from our with the outreach workers and the caseworkers that are working with is that we care about you. You matter to us, and you're worthy of what this opportunity is. And we know they're going to make mistakes, and we're going to keep. We know they're. You know, we're going to go back and bring them back into the program. We're not going to punish them because they make a mistake. But I think the point you make about what kind of support then is available for the workers who are doing all of this work, we bring them together periodically to do trainings. We recently brought them together to talk about safety issues. So we're giving them outlets to come together as peers and coworkers to do some work. But we do have to, you know, over the course of the next few years that we're working on this program, we have to pay attention to the workers because they're really on the front lines. They're seeing the trauma up front and close and personal, and that does really. It weighs on people, and we have to be able to address that. Thanks for the question, Jack.
Great, that was a question. There's a woman with glass on.
Thank you all for being here. I was curious if any of you could address how we might better build up trust in government institutions, particularly with populations that have felt abandoned by those institutions, either because of disinvestment or because they feel like they're being targeted in some way, maybe by the police or by other parts of the government.
You want to talk? I talk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's not an easy question, but thank you very much. Yeah, we have a serious problem in Brazil about this. We have the most, how can I say, the police that killed the most lethal police in the world. Something like 6,000 people are killed each year by the police, and we have more 7,000 bodies that we don't know. And we have a gap, enormous gap between some communities, poor communities, and police. And the problem is that we are trying to talk about is that it's easy to talk some bad things about police. It's easy. But we are trying to help police to design strategies to reduce violence and improve their legitimacy with these people. We are trying to translate the evidence that we already have in the world. We have something like 200 studies that of high quality in the world about what works in policing. And we are talking with them, look, forget the drugs. Look, the guys, build relations, and this will make the violence decrease. But you have to investigate who is killing. You have to do your job, but don't put in jail only poor guys that are selling drugs in the street, and make good intelligence, good investigation. And we are trying to work, we want to make a partnership with Crime Lab to learn a project of cognitive behavior to work with police. They are suffering too. We have two victims of this war. The young boys, poor and black boys, and the police. They are really in a bad life. They are suffering. Their families are suffering too because they transfer this violence inside their homes. So we have to work with them. And sometimes the movements, the human rights movements, don't want to talk about what to do. And we have to talk. We have to build. So we are trying to do this in some cities, designing plans. Of course, policing and crime prevention too. From the pregnancy, we are working with mothers and fathers, future mothers and fathers, about parenting. We have to talk about this. It's the most important moment of our lives, and we don't have any class about this. And we must have to understand what's this. We are working with American Psychological Association methodology. So we are trying to adapt this methodology, but not adapt and stay with an empty box. We want a more structured strategies to work with them in the field. So this is
Santiago.
I would like to add, and your name is, sorry?
My name is Laura.
Laura, in the case of Medellin, once we acknowledge that public policies and public administrations left behind communities and we decide to invest in those communities, once you put a new school, a new cultural center, it has to be the best. It can't be a mediocre solution. It has to be outstanding with the best standards, because you have to prove not only that you're fulfilling a need, but you paint what you haven't been able to do in previous years and administrations. And that builds confidence and trust with communities because they feel dignified. And we as a public servants, we shouldn't be proud of that because that's our duty. That's our job. We have to deliver the best solutions to every single person. And that's our job. We have to do it. And that's one of the best ways to do that.
Hi, my question is for Evelyn. So Evelyn, you've mentioned the importance of developing public-private partnerships. Have you seen any language gaps or misunderstandings between the public and private partnership, public-private partnerships? And then what kind of advice would you give to your peers globally in regards to communicating or approaching the private sector?
I'm not sure that I understand the question about the language and the public-private.
Yeah, so you've mentioned almost like monetizing value, right? And trying to have corporations understand the importance of becoming involved in their communities. And so how are you able to approach a corporation and allow them to understand value in the same way that you do? And then how would you encourage your peers globally to also interact with their private sponsors?
Got it. Thanks for that clarification. I don't know that we've figured this out exactly. I think in Chicago, I can tell you that one way that we have approached the conversation with the private sector and the public sector has really been through this evaluation research. In Chicago, this is really, it's been an area that has picked up. There's been more research, more rigorous research happening, and so we can come and say, this works. We have some evidence that shows us this works. This is where you should be putting your money, and that has really resulted in a lot of investment in solutions, I think, that would not have gotten as big of an investment without the research. So I really think that the research is an important part of translating between what's happening on the ground and what investors can do about it. And on the public side, having been a public funder for a period of time, it was really important for us to know where our public dollars were going as well. So the evaluation was important. But my point earlier was that we haven't really fully penetrated the private sector. And afterward, Sam's got some reasons why he thinks that's true, but clearly we have still a long way to go to taking these cost analyses, these evaluation researchers, and having people care enough to start getting engaged, and I think that's a challenge that remains before us.
So I know I'm supposed to be the moderator, but I just want to piggyback a little bit on that great question, which is, I think all of us sitting on the stage and probably all of us in this room would like the moral argument to win the day or just the human tragedy to be totally unacceptable. But I also think that if that is not persuasive, there is a self-interest. If you live in a city like Chicago, it is not good, or even if you live on the North Shore and have a company in Chicago, it is not good for us to have the kind of headlines that we have. I really do believe that it is one of the reasons that our population is decreasing as a city. We're likely to become the fourth biggest city, not the third biggest city, because Houston is overtaking us. Their population is growing, and it's very hard to be a global city or a world-class city and tolerate this kind of violence. So I think there are many reasons why. We just have to figure out which ones are going to resonate with whom to do that. So I think.
Can I make a comment? Oh, sorry.
Quickly.
Really quick. In my city, where we are not working, we are working in other cities. A month ago, some entrepreneurs make a partnership, first one, to help to reduce violence. And they make a fund of something like $5 million. Really good for us. And they buy cars and guns for the police. That's it. In other city that we are working, we talk about with the entrepreneurs, the companies, and we create an opportunity bank they receive the guys that we select that are in risk to a first job, to have a first job. So it's another view, and it's really different. The result is really different for the city.
Great. Well, I think we are out of time. I'm going to thank the MacArthur Foundation for supporting this. I don't know if anybody from MacArthur actually was able to join us tonight. And we are going to stick around for a little bit longer if you have questions. And I really would urge you to come up and talk to our friends from Latin America. There are some extraordinary things happening there. And we did not have enough time to even scratch the surface of the work that's going on. So thank you for coming. And thanks to the council for hosting us.